Hi there, I'm your host Clive Serkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. So we're here today with an old friend of mine, Beth Ann Kaminkow. Beth Ann is now the global CEO of VMLY&R Commerce globally in the VMLY&R office in New York. First of all, and we're going to have to get to that in a second, but let me just say welcome and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Clive. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So I'm sure you've been asked the question. In fact, I saw you posted something on LinkedIn. Tell me, for those 4 people who are living under a rock, what is VMLY&R Commerce? What's the proposition? How does it fit into the VML plus Y&R world? I'd love to get a little background there because I think there's a really interesting story there, and I'd love to sort of get underneath the thinking and the offering.
Well, clearly, we like a lot of letters, so we don't shy away from that. But actually, it's really more about direct association, even though everyone laughs that this is terrible branding. So I will deconstruct a little bit to take out the mystery. VML came together with Y&R. I think it was about 2019 that the two brands came together when Mark Reed took over at WPP. So it was simply just the acknowledgement that you had two great agencies coming together. And rather than think of a new brand and ruin all the equity that both brands had built up in the industry, and they're different amounts of time, Y&R over generations really, and VML over an important time of digital transformation. So those two businesses came together and actually are together seamlessly. It's incredible how strong that integration and teaming together has been. So VMLY&R. And then when we brought commerce, which was largely Geometry Global, but VMLY&R had also made some commerce acquisitions over the years, like Rockfish. You may remember them as early entrants in the digital space. We really felt like what was missing for the powerhouse brand that VMLY&R was positioned and is becoming in WPP and in the industry. A strong commerce component of that was missing globally, and Geometry Global met all the criteria within WPP. It had this global scale, probably the only truly scaled global entity that was fully focused on all things retail, shopper, digital commerce, experiential, leading yourself into transaction and into sales. And so I was leading that business and driving a transformation there. And that had started in 2019, gotten to know John really well and the team there. And so we brought, as we were creating these bigger powerhouse creative brands within WPP, we brought commerce in. And rather than, again, think of a brand new name that was like funky and cool, we thought, let's just be clear to clients in the industry. We're going to own commerce, and we're going to own it as VMLY&R, and we're largely integrated in that BX through CX offer that goes now all the way end to end through commerce. So it's VMLY&R Commerce. We've allowed it to be as distinct brand, as a go-to-market strategy, as a front door that clients enter when they want commerce work. And it is, been serving the growth of our business really well, because we're, now known in the industry as probably, if not one of the strongest commerce entities, but also fully embedded in one of the strongest agencies now in the world.
Yeah. And the choice of commerce is interesting to me. And I know you use the term creative commerce. And I know if we go back in our history, I used to get hysterical when people said digital marketing, and probably too hysterical. But the point I was trying to get after is it frustrates me. And more importantly, I think it hurts business when under the headline of specialty or building out new capability, you give it a name. Because what happens when you give it a name, then what companies tend to do is they build a fence around it and they allocate dollars to it, and then they go and do random acts of, in the case of digital marketing, random acts of digital marketing. And I always, used to yell and scream and pound the table saying, we live in a digital world. Everything is digital. We're marketing. I think similarly, we're in, every brand out there is in the business of commerce. At the end of the day, like if you go back way in the days, we used to, and I'm embarrassed, we'd say, build equity and then one day equity convert to sales, which is essentially bullshit, right? And the end of the day, certainly I believe, is equity is a consequential outcome of commerce that delights. So I'm assuming that that's behind it. But I'd love to hear your version of creative commerce because you're actually doing it, and I'm just pontificating.
No, I mean, I think that, again, you mentioned to everybody that we go way back. So I have, emblazoned in my mind a lot of our early debates and thinking. And I think this is a continuation of exactly what you're talking about. And I think, a part of it is you give language to scope of work and to budgets when you're in our industry. I remember in 2019 when geometry was called, I don't know, brand activation and a whole bunch of other kind of fancy things, which I also think was even more confusing. And so when I laid the flag down on the planet that said, this is going to be called creative commerce, I think a lot of people were like, what is commerce? And, thank God at least you're using the language of creative. So we're going to still be creative in what we execute and what we do, and how we approach this. But because at the end of the day, driving conversion kind of still sounds like shopper marketing and some kind of toolkit last effort that happens at the end of the funnel, which is all stuff that I think we all cringe about. And so this was an attempt to say that cringeworthy stuff is for a reason. How do we elevate this in the minds and the agenda of clients, and properly focus on it the way consumers are experiencing the marketing that we do? Can we really create consumer-centric design in how we approach these things now finally, and recognize how are people behaving, and how do then we meet them with the creativity and the engagement, to your point, that does build brand equity, but also drives conversion. And so how do we create, and the reason why I think the language is important is because you still have to put the science behind it. You have to give it the frame for people to then, give it the attention and the recognition that it deserves, which is what's happened now with Cannes Lions, convincing Cannes not to call it e-commerce and not just create a category, but represent and recognize what this category is meant to do now, and what kind of work could be behind it, and what kind of work should we be awarding as creative commerce, which was a great holiday present to get from them. And to not belabor this, but to say, we all know that COVID was this great accelerator. And if you told me when we convinced the whole agency to call this commerce, that the whole world was going to be speaking in terms of commerce in 2021 and 2022, I would have said, not to the level that things have really proliferated. And this is incredible. Look, the whole world is caught up to creative commerce. And if you ask me, it's probably the realest, richest, consumer centric version of marketing today.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's like to your point, when you get a discipline or a skill and then you create a department around it, you actually hurt the business. In the end, at the end of the day, and to your point, I think COVID and the massive acceleration of D2C sort of woke up people, which shockingly it would have to take that to get that kind of awakening. But I feel like everything that any brand does should be about converting content to commerce. And then the degree to which you do it in a novel, creative way, the degree to which you delight that person who puts their hand in the pocket and gives you your money, is the degree to which you're going to get sustained growth. And like for me, that's everything. Like, I mean, if I was advising clients now, I'd be saying the first thing you should do is be thinking about what's your tech stack designed to drive content to commerce, and then build from there, which is a long way from the old days, which was like, shopper marketing or, then e-commerce is like this thing off on the side, which is a shame. But I can see you smiling now, but you got to be smiling as a professional who's had a long career in this business that finally it's now center of the plate and people have sort of got it.
And it's not by accident. Like,
Right.
it wasn't, like some of us hung into this space because we believed in this and we knew that this was right ultimately. And we were trying to find clients like you that we could convince. But now that, again, sometimes it takes that technology, that consumer adoption of some of that technology, and the ability, we've always said this, to measure and have the metrics behind it to close the loop, that gives something the force and the power to change. And so I think you're exactly right. And I think we're still there in terms of the evolution, because there's still CMOs that are holding on to this idea that this anthemic film or something that they're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on are somehow, doing the job, or equally important or more important. And I think that we're still in that evolution, and I think that's why we were so intent on calling this creative commerce, because the more that you bring that creativity and that braveness into the space, and you're actually giving consumers what it is that they want, you're recognizing that it's these things do not have to be mutually exclusive. You can build brand equity at the same. I mean, that is the very point, right? I think the
Right.
problem is that the organizations, for good reason, set up sales and they set up marketing, right? And so they were set up to compete for dollars and compete for doing things a different way, and justifying your job for different metrics.
Right. Well, it's funny. Grant LaMontagne, who's going to be a guest in the next coming episodes, when he and I were partners, he used to talk about it in terms of a symphony, right? Not in terms of this binary construct of marketing and sales, which is like so like of the dinosaur ages, right? And it's like, for me, there's creativity, which is the intelligence to come up with something that moves somebody to put their hand in their pocket. And then there's crafting, which is a whole different other ball. And none of these things are binary constructs. They should all work in construct to get to one outcome, which is the metric that counts, certainly the leading indicator that counts, which is, are you growing the business profitably?
Well,
So
if I can use your language, and this is what was seared in my mind and really, made a huge difference in how I thought of this in my career. It was the commercial idea, I think, was how you defined it.
yep,
I remember when you started bringing that concept forward and putting that into briefs and pushing, well, this isn't a commercial idea. And you would always give like that Kellogg example of Special K and the eating bowls of Special K.
the 2 week challenge, yeah.
New challenge, exactly. And it became the ultimate for us that was creative commerce. And it was like that was the early way of being able to understand and define. You're involving somebody, you're asking them to go do something, but that takes creativity, takes functionality. And now that you bring in social platforms and other marketplaces and all these other great tools, from a Pinterest to a TikTok, you have these mechanics, you have this utility that you can weave into what you're asking, how you want people to engage with the brand, that makes sense and is on purpose and on brand, but is ultimately meant to drive that conversion, because that's where the consumption and that's where the like ability to really love a brand comes from. And so I always have in my mind that searching for that what is the true kind of commercial idea. So it's still idea, it's still rooted in creativity, but that as asking people to act, asking, moving people to drive to conversion, and have a relationship with the brand.
Totally. I want to switch gears because the premise of this podcast is unstuck, right? And we've been talking about how companies can get unstuck and get out of sort of constructs of the past. But I want to talk about your career, because you had this incredible career, and you go back to the early days of starting in PR and getting into consulting, and then going into retailer client side retail, and then consulting and tech and PR again, and shopper and comment. Talk about how you've approached your career, and how, at least on the surface, you managed to not get stuck, or when you did get stuck, how you got unstuck. Because it's an incredible career, and it's incredibly refreshing to see the breadth and the success that you've had.
Wow, that's very sweet of you to say. Maybe it's because I never really think of it that way, that you keep feeling like the goalpost is, ahead and moving. I'm definitely fueled by the challenge and the learning and the curiosity, a lot of those things that you hear from other people as well. I mean, it truly is sort of hardwired in me. And, really the biggest thing for me has been getting to work with people like yourself. And I'm saying that in, full genuineness of like, I've always been about this idea of like unlocking creative potential. And part of it was selfish. It was in me, you feel it churning in you, and you're trying to constantly find those people around you and those situations and opportunities that will unlock that. But then also like not being able to sleep at night if I saw it in someone else and I felt like they weren't in the position and they weren't making it happen, or they were stuck somewhere, also propelled me to be in leadership positions, because it gave me more influence and able to impact others' careers. And then I realized this becomes a virtuous cycle, not a vicious cycle that sometimes you're trapped in if you're in toxic or in, bad environments, that does suck it out of you and make you feel stuck. So the empowerment and the more I was kind of in leadership positions to be able to create this virtuous kind of, involvement with others and cycle of unlocking potential was and is a big driver of, for me. And I think there's been threads, even though it sounds like a lot of things that you mentioned are, were a lot of different opportunities. There was like threads of similarities in what I was going after, either in terms of the learning or the gap that I felt like I had, like what go get go understand data and analytics better than I did before. And that was the Cantor and Cantor consulting environment. Consulting requires you to be at that level, head to head with your clients, where you're peers with the C-suite and the boardrooms, and you're having to deal with their biggest, most challenging issues and be really accountable and responsible for
Yep.
those solutions. Being on the client side myself, of really being in a client's shoes, having a singular problem you're trying to solve for, but still within the retail environment that was reimagining and reinventing and needed to, be solid for the future. So I've kind of navigated my career that way, and tied myself to people that helped me get unstuck in those moments, and recognizing you never have all the answers yourself, or even, can't even attempt to, it's just your career is so much more fun when you're attached to smart people and creative people. And that's really been at the heart of how I've made my, decisions and navigated my career.
Well, it's funny being attached to smart people. It's like there's a guy, Pete Alcamara, who a colleague and a friend of mine, and he's sort of the intellectual genesis of this podcast. And the thing he said to me, we were having drinks one night talking, and he talked about um, performance versus potential. And the point, and he gave this formula, which is, performance equals potential minus obstacles plus encouragement. And it's like, he made me think about how much as a leader and how much in organizations we spend so much time managing and measuring performance, and relatively speaking, how little time we work on unlocking potential. And then even worse, in my case, if I was honest, like how many obstacles I put in the way of like wonderful talent, and how little encouragement I gave at my worst. And now, and you talk about as you've become, as your career has evolved, and now in a meaningful sort of leadership role that impacts the potential of so many people. How are you thinking about that? Because it's easy, like when I'm doing the scorecard of myself, looking back and cringing, it's easy to get caught up in the tensions and the pressures and forget that the primary role is to unlock people and to be a meaningful enabler to people.
Well, my IP and my soul song is what I call leverage. So my secret ingredient is love. And Clive, I'll be honest too. Like I felt that with you as well, and I was there on the receiving end. And I try to meet you. I don't know if you were, how much you recall, but I try to meet you with my ingredient, which was love. And you try to open people up through that channel. And to me, that's where potential comes from, right? Like, yes, in our environment and industry, we have so much pressure and stress around us. We grew up with leaders that were a little bit more tough love, were, how much can you cause someone to suffer? And, from that sort of pain comes this glory of creativity and landing it finally. And I've just saw that happen in cycles over and over again. And I was on the receiving end of it myself, and was just like, that just doesn't, at the end of the day, sometimes it might bring about the greatness, but oftentimes it also leaves you feeling, weighty and sometimes toxic, and, ultimately looking for an escape and not feeling that great about, yourself and the situation. And so I've just always led with love. I mean, I just genuinely, I know it's odd language to use professionally, and I have a lot of work and a lot of writing behind it, but I've trialed it over and over again, especially around that whole movement of a person's why and how you get to the why. And I think the how is equally important with the why, and how, and to me, how you do it has to be every transformation, all growth comes from a place of love, whether that's through coaches, parents, environments, spaces where that you feel safe, you feel respected, there's a mutuality to it, and that someone's really caring about operating in your best interest.
Well, and for those of you, what Beth Ann is referred to as our past, when we first met, it was in a really tough business environment, and we're in the midst of this turnaround. And I'll never forget during these intense meetings, which for the record, I could have behaved better. In the room during these like intense conversations, there was just this person sitting across the table who was just the picture of calm. And you never ever took the bait. And you always did that love thing, right? And I remember going home oftentimes going like, I have got so much to learn. There is so much I can, and it was a huge impact. And the story sort of ends because now Beth Ann is the CEO of that company, right? That the other company, right? So it's been a huge learning experience for me being around Beth Ann, and I think it's, again, I refer to when I've been at my worst is when I've done the opposite of that, not maliciously or intentionally, but it's so easy when the pressure, intensity, and in my case, the passion translates into the opposite, and then it becomes a really destructive. And that's why I'm committed to this conversation and getting people to sort of pause and think about it, because I still think 9 out of 10 times when humans don't behave at their best, it's not malicious intent. It's just the hubris and the reality of what goes on.
100%.
So let's talk about something that I assume is front and center as the leader of a massive organization, which is post-COVID, pre-COVID, current COVID, the future. Where do your people work? Hybrid workforce, etc. And how are you guys thinking about it? And I'll throw something out there because I was thinking about this, and my question for you is, are we asking the wrong questions, which is, should our people be working at the office or not, or what does hybrid work look like? And rather ask the question, how do we maximize collaboration to get impact? Because maybe if we ask the question differently, we may get a different answer. I don't know, but I'm pretty certain you've spent a lot of calories discussing what's going to happen in your organization.
I completely agree, and I think the way you've reframed that question is spot on. I think we're conflating managing through the pandemic with what has this taught us about the future of work, right? So oftentimes we're getting caught up as leaders answering things in the middle of managing a pandemic and people's health and safety, with the bigger idea of like how do we lead what should be the future of, and it's different for different organizations. And also when you're in professional services, we should be co-joined up and co-creating with our clients, because that's ultimately who we serve. So answering it for ourselves without thinking about that in relation to our clients, I think is also a misstep. And so I think you're exactly right. And that is how I've been trying to, one, also bring a lot of people in to help shape and start to architect. And I think there's certain things too that we can't completely design or predict, because so much of this evolution is taking place, and the tools and the technology is transforming every day. Like, again, everyone talks about how productive we've been, but don't forget, if we weren't using Zoom at work before, but if we didn't have tools like Teams and Zoom and Miro boards and all this other stuff that was already out there for our use, can you imagine what a disaster things could have been, and how isolated and cut off from each other people would have been? So, one thing that I always remind myself to think about is, when you think pre-pandemic, people who were entrepreneurs and working on their own, look at the massive business that WeWork spun up. Look at Soho houses and clubs. I mean, people weren't electing to work out of their bedrooms by themselves for no reason. Why would we think that that is going to be the future of work, of exciting work, right? We've proved to ourselves that we can work remotely wherever we want to, productively. But the answer of how we deliver our outcomes for the future is absolutely going to be a really exciting, inspiring mix of optionality for people, right? And as leaders, we get to define now what that starts to look like, and what the cadence that takes. But we owe it to people, I think, to actually think about enhancing the virtual experiences as much as the physical experiences. And I think we're over indexing on this side of, is somebody going to walk through this front door of this real estate in the city, which leads us down a road of sort of a defensive stature and things that are freaking employees out and creating potentially turnover because they're just looking for the grass is going to be greener somewhere else, or they're going to have something that feels more like what they think they want. And I quite honestly don't think people know what they want either. I think it's going to be incumbent on a lot of leadership to kind of show that way too, because look at what's happening with all the isolation. I mean, mental illness and anxiety and some of these other things have never been higher. And I know there's a lot of things contributing to that, not just, the work environment, but I do think it's going to be incumbent on leaders to lead and to pioneer what this future is going to look like for us. But I can't imagine it's not going to be so inspiring and something that we all wish that we could have had probably a decade ago, right?
Right.
Because of all of the things that it's going to open up in our lives. And it's going to be a mix. I don't even like the language hybrid, but it's going to be an interesting cocktail of types of experiences that we get to create for people to drive the outcomes that we're looking for.
Right. Oh, I love that. The notion of what kind of experience you want to create. I mean, we're having at Screen Dragon, we're having a similar conversation, which is, on the surface, we're a process management tool, we're a workflow management thing, but we're we're not in the business of automating process. To the contrary, because process was designed to make people's lives easier so they can put more time into the outcome and less time into managing the beast. And so we're having this conversation where we go, we're in the business of taming process. We're in the business of making process do what it's supposed to do and work for you versus turning you into the slave of process. And I think so when you change the question, you start getting to the real answer of what you're trying to do versus going down this little non-rational escalation of commitment sort of dance. But I love the way you're thinking about it in terms of experiences. Um, I'm sensitive to time, and the time has flown. I got two more questions for you if I can keep you around because I know you're busy. I want to talk about an organization that you're involved in. I've always wanted to ask you this question. We've never got around to because it's always been business or something else. But back on your feet or back on my feet is something that I know you're heavily involved in. It sounds incredibly interesting and a powerful idea. I'd love you to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's a foundation. It's all around the US, so it's not quite global yet, although we've done a little bit in London. It runs by national or local chapters, of which we're in many of the major cities around the U.S. It's about using running to help with homelessness. We talk about people experiencing homelessness, not homeless people or people who are destitute or destined to have a homeless life. So there could be people that are coming out of incarceration. People who are in shelters for whatever reason, but that they don't want that. They're fighting against that future. They don't want to accept that as their future. And so there's an openness to figure out, how do I get the tools to be more of a productive part of society again, or to be somebody who has the wherewithal to be able to have a home and have a job. And so when we use literally the simple tool of running, and sometimes now we've almost opened it up so that there's walking and things like that. But within the shelters, there's a commitment to run, 3 days a week. And it's early morning. It's like 5 a.m. or 5:15. If you go to a shelter that has a Back of My Feet, anyone is welcome to come and be part of the group that goes running. What you realize through that is literally we're all back on our feet every day. To your point of being unstuck, you have to wake up and decide to go for it every day. And some days are harder than others. And there's not much that separates us from people who are less fortunate and are in situations that are causing homelessness. So I love it because I love going those runs. It's incredibly humbling. And you see these people who are facing really unfair and difficult circumstances, and oftentimes haven't felt ever a part of a community or felt like people who care about them and want them to be in a better situation. Just that sense of knowing people want them to be in a better situation and are respecting them for who they are in the tough times they may have been through, oftentimes is motivating enough for these people to strap on some sneakers and go out for anywhere from a 1 to 3 mile run. And then they get it themselves into half marathons and marathons. Through this commitment, they earn points in getting them into training and then getting them into programs that give them job skill. They get their jobs, then we give them homes, and literally we see a very low residual rate. And it's not like we can help thousands, because oftentimes thousands don't fit the profile or it's hard to scale it. But in the cities where we have just an incredible community of people who have literally succeeded at not getting a hand out, but a hand up, and being in a much better circumstance because of our program. It's incredibly inspiring. The stories are inspiring. Go to the website, watch some of the videos, and I invite everyone to come out for a run.
I'd love to dedicate an entire podcast to this. I was talking to a gentleman in my neighborhood I talk to often, and he's experiencing homelessness. And the thing that he said to me, when I said the thing that bothers you the most wasn't that he was homeless. He said he felt disconnected, that he didn't feel part of the community, and he felt sort of like, away from it. And it really touched me. It was like my first things were like, how do we help him get a home, which obviously is crucial. But there was something more fundamental to him that he felt. I remember spending whenever I walk home, I stop and we talk, and it was such a powerful thought. It was like he feels disconnected. And he was like just hanging and talking to another human made him feel connected, and he has a clear path to getting back on track, and he's dealing with some issues. But it's such a powerful organization. I'd love to spend a whole podcast talking about it and the underlying issue. And I love the work that you're doing. I've got to wrap it up, so I'm going to ask one more question, which kind of you've answered by being involved in Back of My Feet. But I ask everyone is like, how do you spring clean your brain? How do you keep your brain fresh? What are you doing? And I would imagine being involved in Back of Your Feet is a big part of that. But what else are you doing?
Well, I think, to a lot of the conversation that we've been having, you have to always be on that kind of beginner mindset. Things are changing so fast. And, even like the master classes, things like that. I love content. I absorb so much content, and I'm okay sort of dumping stuff that I think is no longer going to serve me. I mean, the fundamentals are the fundamentals. So I think we talked about that a little bit earlier too. Going back and rereading certain things that keep you clear about, sort of being able to simplify sometimes some of the complexity. I do that in tandem with the new that's coming in, but also dumping the stuff that kind of feels like it will no longer serve the moment that we're in. And I'm just a content person. I love podcasts. I love this, that you're doing this. You're perfect for it. But I listen to, a ton of podcasts. In fact, I train myself because I do morning runs myself when I'm not with Back of My Feet. I listen to podcasts, not music, when I run now, which has been incredible. And even audiobooks. So I've been going through even more books that way. So I'm constantly out there kind of searching for how other people are thinking about things. So it's not just the topic, but it's also how people do think, how they approach strategically the challenges that they're facing, and give you new ways of kind of applying and thinking about the world that we're in, and how we're more human with each other and things like that. So that's sort of what does it for me, and it's still been working. And then, like we said before, surrounding ourselves with people who can do that for us too, and appreciate ourselves that way. So I'm, again, very appreciative of our long time relationship, and that we could come back together in a moment like this to have this kind of conversation and, put some of our thinking out there.
There you have it. Beth Ann Kaminkow, Global CEO of VMLY&R, but more importantly, fabulous human. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Clive. I look forward to talking soon.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit screendragon.com to see our software in action.